I think one of the most important unfair advantages that we can have isn't about us per se. It's actually about what kind of unfair advantage can we provide to our clients.
Hey friends, it's Steve. Want to know how a $5 book lands a $5,000 client? I've recorded a 15-minute video showing you our magnetic author method. It's up now at magneticauthor.co/video. Welcome to the Unstoppable CEO podcast. I'm your host, Steve Gordon, and we've got an amazing interview for you today. This one is one I have been looking forward to for a long time because it is with the author of what I think is one of the best new business books that you're going to find. In fact, I think this one's going to be a classic. It is How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed. And today I am talking with Stu Heinecke. He's the best-selling business author, marketer, and a Wall Street Journal cartoonist. His first book, How to Get a Meeting with Anyone, was named one of the top 64 sales books of all time. His latest, as I mentioned, How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed, lays out a complete model for explosive business growth, which is what we all want. And the book is based all around the strategies and the attributes and the tools that weeds use to grow and expand and multiply and dominate their turf. And so it's just, I think, an incredible way to look at business. I'm excited to dive into it and really excited that Stu Heinecke is here with me. Stu, welcome to the Unstoppable CEO.
I'm so glad to be here with you. Thanks so much, Steve. Really appreciate it.
So before we dive into the book, and the book is fantastic, before we dive into the book, give everybody just a little bit of background beyond the bio of how you got to this stage of your career and how you found weeds as a source of inspiration for business.
Well, I have a crazy background because I was at the very beginning of my career. I was mentored by several of a lot of the greatest cartoonists in the world, from Playboy and the New Yorker. That's like where I started my career, and I've had an interesting time because I've used cartoons in marketing. Against the advice of David Ogilvy and others who used to say that humor doesn't work in advertising and people don't buy from clowns. But in fact, I knew that cartoons were the best read and remembered parts of magazines and newspapers. And so it turned out that was the correct impression and that they worked really, really well. And so I ended up creating direct mail campaigns for a lot of the big magazine publishers and then a lot of direct marketers using personalized cartoons. And that was what a blast that was. Now, that sort of, there are a couple of ways that branches out. So one of them is I have another book out that came out in 2016 called How to Get a Meeting with Anyone. And that book started because when I was reaching out to the publishers, I had gotten a couple of test campaigns ahead of time. I got one with Rolling Stone, the other one with Bon Appetit. And both of these test campaigns went out, they were mailed against their control group, if that makes sense. But and we ended up beating the controls, which is really an unusual and rare event. So it was like a rookie walking onto the baseball field in the major leagues and hitting 2 Grand Slam home runs. And I thought, okay, this is my chance to reach out to the rest of the publishing industry. And what it meant was I needed to connect with about, let's say, 24 VPs and directors of circulation or consumer marketing at the big ones like Time Inc. and Condé Nast and the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, et cetera. And I needed a way to get through to them. And I knew it was not going to be terribly easy, but I thought, so I'm going to put a little campaign together. I put together this little 8x10 print of a cartoon about each recipient and sent that with a note saying, this is the device I just used to beat the controls for Rolling Stone and Bon Appetit. And, I think we should talk. I think we should test this for your titles. And if I'm in front of an audience telling that story, I'm usually asking them, so what do you think I got as a response rate? But we don't have that luxury today, but I got through to all of them. It was 100% response rate to that campaign. And not only that, they all agreed to meet. They all became clients. So it was a 100% response rate, 100% meeting rate, 100% conversion from a little campaign that I spent $100 on. And I got really excited. Then I'm like, wow, who else can I reach with these cartoon contact pieces? And so I started reaching out to presidents, and I was reaching presidents and prime ministers and celebrities and lots of C-level folks and just top decision makers. And then I got really curious. Well, what's everyone else doing? And I realized, well, there's this whole shadow form of marketing out there. No one had a name for it, so I called it contact marketing and how to get a meeting with anyone. And people have come up with the most incredibly audacious and clever ways to get meetings with probably the kind of people that are in your audience, actually. But really some very, very clever, smart things that they've been doing. And that's what informed that book. And the Weeds book, I think, is even more fun because, well, I was driving down the Santa Monica Freeway a long time ago, and it was back when traffic moved really fast. It was really a long time ago. And it's 6 lanes of traffic going one way, 6 lanes of traffic coming the other way, and a 40-foot wide median or so. It's a lot of concrete and rushing tires, no place for a plant to take root. Yet growing from a crack in the concrete median was a dandelion I spotted. And, I went by it really fast. And this is something we see all the time, dandelions growing out of cracks in concrete. But that one really struck me because I thought, well, it just looked happy running its process. Those happy yellow flowers and the seed pods they're blowing seeds around and it's just kind of bouncing around in the smoggy turbulence. It looked happy. It didn't look like it was thinking to itself, well, this sucks. I really saw myself as living at the beach, let's say, But instead, it was just running its process. And I just thought, it's just so impressive. And I hope that I can live up to that example throughout my career in whatever businesses I create. And that just got me interested in, well, what is it that they're doing? Or how is it that weeds act the way weeds do? Is it a specific species, perhaps? And that's not really the case, but, or do they all have a model that they all follow? And in fact, they do. And if they do have that model, can we apply it to our businesses? And what I've discovered is not only can we apply it to our businesses, but we can apply it to anything that we need to have grow. So it could be applied within a department, for example, just for their efforts. Or my book, I'm using weed strategy to promote my book and to cause it to grow. And so it's not just having a publicist out there pushing me as a guest for interviews, but I'm forming alliances and I'm doing things that weeds do, and it's causing the book to do some really, really interesting things.
Yeah, I mean that's really the thing that struck me about the observations that you put in the book is that, I mean, the weeds give a kind of a cool and maybe cute context for it, but really what you're talking about is a hardcore growth strategy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, the way they approach this, they're serious about growing and persisting and dominating whatever space they're in. And I will tell you that, I live in Florida, so things don't go brown very often, but we are far enough north that the lawn goes dormant and, for a few months in the winter, and you can immediately spot where the weeds are. And those suckers are green, aggressive. Right? Yeah, they're still green.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're just amazing. And I think, it's interesting when the book first launched, it launched in June. So the first interviews, the interviewers would ask, so Stu, are we talking about the kind of weed that you smoke? No, that's not what we're talking about. And oh, you mean the weeds? You mean that like those things in my lawn, those things that I hate? Yes, those things that you can't control. And by the way, why can't you control them? What are they doing? What are they up to? Have you noticed any of this? And then we go to a place where it's a useful conversation. And thank you, by the way, in your introduction, because this is going to sound crazy. And I don't know that every author comes on your show and tells you this, but I actually think that it's going to become the top business growth title on the market. Not right away. And not because of the launch, not because of anything my publicists are doing, but because the weeds Well, we all know what it means to grow like a weed. And if you look at what they're doing, they're awesome. I mean, they are so effective. And there's just plenty to learn from them. And I think that's the reason. And they keep coming out every year. So it's kind of like Christmas music. So, every year, every spring, there's a reminder of the book, perhaps. So
I'll tell you what struck me about the observations in the book and as they relate to weeds and how you've transferred them to businesses is that you've got a small number of principles that they operate by. And that really simplifies. I mean, if you apply those to business and you boil down every one of those processes into one thing that you do in that area of your business, then you end up with about, 8 things to do in your business instead of 8,000. And I think too often we're trying to do the 8,000 things when we really just need to do 8 really, really well and a lot. And that's what the weeds are doing.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think, I think one of the wonderful things that weeds give us is that if you read the press, let's say if you read, I don't know if I should name names, but there are certain magazines, big business magazines that will tell you, they'll have, titles for their articles like 3 things you have to do, or the one thing that Elon Musk just did that's genius and you got to do it and that'll grow your business. I mean, that's a long headline, but
right.
It's, or the one thing that Warren Buffett did that can change everything in your business. And you read through it and what you end up with is just this random list of probably 8,000 things. That's probably where it comes from. But, it doesn't really give you a model to place these into or a framework to place these into so that you can act on them. And you just can't act on an endless, meandering list of things you should do to grow. So the weeds give us a very, very finite, very well-defined framework to grow our businesses through.
So as you're talking with business owners about how to apply what's in the book, and I kind of want to address that first. What's the approach to apply this? I'd love to hear your take. I kind of have my takeaway from reading it. I'm wondering how close I am to the author's intent. But how would you advise a business owner to go about taking these? And we'll get into what they are in a minute. But to apply them, what's the strategy?
Well, first of all, there's weeds strategy. So that's the overarching concept here. And so weed strategy is based on the thing that all weeds do to grow and expand and dominate their turf and so on. And that is that they all leverage a fierce mindset. We have to come back to that mindset because how could they have a mindset? Mm-hmm. But they do. It's apparent. You can see it. So they leverage a fierce mindset and unfair advantages against collective scale. And they do it according to a process that is, well, in their case, it's really well honed. It's millions of years old, but it's also a living process. It's not the kind of process I think that we think of in business. It's a living process that's always ready to evolve, always ready to meet new challenges. They're very, very effective at all of that. So that's the weeds model. And then we can look at, I just described 4 elements then. So mindset and unfair advantages and scale or collective scale, and then process. And all 4 of those areas yield all kinds of really interesting pathways to growth. And in fact, I often am asked, well, what's the one thing we can do to grow our business? Well, it's not one thing. And why would you want to, if you have 4 growth multipliers, why would you want to ignore any of them? Actually, right. The more, if you use all 4, then you're going to grow quicker and more, I guess, just more powerfully.
Yeah, without a doubt. And as I kind of went through and looked at sort of the 8 strategies in the model, I thought, wow, if I could pick out one thing to do in each of those areas and just focus on the one thing in each of those areas, to your point, that's 8 multipliers. Mm-hmm. That's 8 things now and that's all I've got to focus on. And it really simplifies things. So do you want to maybe quickly just run us through the strategies? I know in the limited time we have, it's going to be hard to get through all of this, but I'd like to just give people a quick sense of what is in there. And then I'd love to talk a little bit about scale, because you talk about leverage and scale towards the end of the book. And you talk about one-to-one leverage. And I know a lot of people listening are dealing with that. So I think in terms of a roadmap, I'd love to do that. So can you give us just that quick overview? And then let's talk about leverage and scale a bit.
Yeah, well, so I mentioned, mindset and unfair advantages against collective scale, and then running a process. So that whole aspect of developing and curating unfair advantages falls under the WEEDS. It's an acronym for Weed Inspired Enterprise Expansion and Nomination Strategies. So that WEEDS model, which starts with seed strategy and then moves to seed pod strategy and thorn strategy and segmentation, all the way through root and soil strategies. And those are set up to help us gain those unfair advantages. And it's interesting because when I'm talking to live audience, when I'm talking, let's say on a round table or something like that, and I ask some of the people on the Zoom call, well, what are your unfair advantages? What do you do for a business? And what are your unfair advantages? They have a really tough time answering. They'll say things like, well, okay, yeah, well, I'm really passionate about what I do. No, everyone can be passionate about what they do. It's not an unfair advantage. There's no, as Warren Buffett likes to call it, there's no moat around that at all. So what are the advantages that you can cultivate that give you an actual, by unfair advantage, I mean, that's the reaction we want among our competitors. When they hear what it is, the reaction is the advantage you have, we want them saying, well, that's unfair, right? Because they can't compete against it. That's really what we're talking about are hard advantages that others can't compete against. So seeds, seed pods, and so forth, they define these levels of strategy and sort of cultivation of those unfair advantages. So in seed strategy, for example, the seeds are analogous in the model to anything that causes people to become aware of you and form the intent to transact with you in some way. They might want to join your list. They might want to become your client. They might want to follow you, whatever it is that they want to do. They might want to collaborate with you. They might want to open their sales channel to you. They might want to partner with you. They might want to be mentored or mentor you, whatever it is. That's how people become aware of you. And it's, you can just think of dandelion seeds. They float around and they probe every possible opportunity to take root. And that's what we want our seeds to do. We want all of these things like alliances and brands and names, I should say brand names and media exposure and story. I mean, people have compelling stories and that get repeated and repeated. And those are the kinds of things that we want to cultivate. I would say also that under seed strategy, you find things like marketing. I mean, that's marketing and publicity are two critical seed strategies that you have to have in operation or nothing's going to happen. But gaining, let's say, a lot of media exposure becomes a huge unfair advantage. It's hard for your competitors to match that. Does that make sense at all?
Absolutely. And this idea of unfair advantage I know for a lot of business owners, it's hard to come up with these things. And
it is. Yes, it is.
I think the mistake is trying to, go in a conference room somewhere and, you sit around with the team and you've got a whiteboard and pizza and coffee, or something else, and you're trying to come up with it. And I don't think that's where you come up with it. I think you do little experiments. And I think that's what the seeds reveal, is that they do all of these experiments and they see which ones work.
Yes.
And the ones that work persist, because they're getting feedback from the environment. In our case, in business, we're getting feedback from the marketplace based on what we do. I think that's how you discover those advantages.
Yeah. I think you might be alluding to the water hemp example in the book, which was one of the most extreme weeds that I've come across. It's showing up in farmland across North America, and so dandelions put out 15,000 seeds on average per plant, and that's over a 5 to 10 year lifespan. They're perennials. So, and we know if your lawn is filled with dandelions, you're not going to get rid of them. So 15,000 seeds per plant, it's a big multiplier. But water hemp puts out up to 4.8 million seeds per plant, and it's an annual. So this population dies off every year. There's a new population every year. So a big part of their process and their evolution is invested in their seeds, and they do exactly what you just described. If every plant is producing 4.8 million seeds, there are a lot of useful mutations in those seeds has caused a crazy thing to happen because water hemp showed up. The farmers have used herbicides, including Roundup, glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, and that plant developed immunity to Roundup and 70% of all the other herbicides within 4 years through that process. So they're very adaptive. And I mean, you have to look at them and say, I want my business to act. I want it to be just like that in our field, exactly like that. I want it to be such a tough competitor that you just can't get rid of us. And so I just love that. But when we think about unfair advantages, would it be helpful if I gave you some of mine?
That would be great. Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, well, so just a couple real quick. I mean, one is I'm one of the Wall Street Journal cartoonists. So when my cartoons are published, then I get to reach 2.1 million readers. That's a nice unfair. People are going to have a hard time matching that if that's important competitively. And also when I'm calling around, if I'm trying to meet someone, if I'm trying to connect with someone, all I have to do is send them one of my cartoons, and I can call up their assistant and say, "Hi, I'm Stu Heinecke. I'm one of the Wall Street Journal cartoonists, and I'm sending a print of a cartoon by one of my cartoons, actually, and it's about your boss." Usually they're saying, "What, really?" So it helps me get through it. It's just sort of a passport through. And then also we have a new alliance brewing with the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. Their executive director wrote the foreword to my book, and I mentioned in the book that I'm going to be starting the Total Lead Award, and we're partnering with the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center to present that. They're going to be the home of the Total Lead Award, and so that's great. I mean, there's sort of a renewal of excitement and buzz about the book, because that's where the Total Lead Award is coming from, and we're going to have media partners involved in this. So I imagine that it's going to get much expanded coverage because of that. And those are totally unfair advantages if someone's trying to compete with me in what I'm doing.
Well, I want to just pause there for a second and break that down a little bit, because a lot of people are going to listen and go, "Well, I'm never going to be a cartoonist for the Wall Street Journal. I can't even draw." And they've already clearly got plenty of cartoonists. And then they might think, "Well, how can I ever do this then?" And really what you've described there is you've created some very unique relationships that are challenging to get, right? So you created a relationship with the Wall Street Journal based on a talent that you have and a skill that you've developed, okay? Mm-hmm. But lots of people have talents and skills that are valuable. And it's the combination of the skill and the relationship. It's not the skill by itself, because there are lots of cartoonists that aren't Wall Street Journal cartoonists, right?
Yeah.
It's the combination that's valuable.
I think these unfair advantages, they take all kinds of forms. So
sure.
I'm just those are the forms that they happen to take in my case. But I would say that, if you have a special skill, that's great. If you have connections, if you've worked somewhere before, if you were a former consultant with McKinsey, then you probably ought to be leveraging that. Whatever these things might be, they can take a lot of different forms. But I think one of the most important unfair advantages that we can have isn't about us per se. It's actually about what kind of unfair advantage can we provide to our clients. And so, when I started my business all those many years ago, and I came out with these direct mail campaigns that used personalized cartoons, and we were drawing on what we were already seeing, what they were already seeing with their editorial readership surveys, that cartoons were almost always the best read and remembered parts. So of course we should use them. And so every time I created a campaign for them, I knew that my assignment was to create a new unfair, even back then, even though I wasn't a weed strategist or a chief weed officer then, but I knew back then my assignment wasn't just to create a campaign, it was to create a new unfair advantage. And if I had if I'd created a campaign that in test ended up beating their control and also cost less to mail, then I created a new unfair advantage for them. And I think that is probably one of the most important unfair advantages we can have, is the ability to do that for our clients.
Absolutely. I love that. And thank you for putting that fine point on it. I want to talk a little bit about leverage. In the book, you talk about one-to-one leverage, and then you talk about there are other types of leverage that we actually want to go to. But if we're honest, the vast majority of entrepreneurs are stuck in one-to-one leverage. Something like 96% of all businesses are under $1 million a year in revenue. So they've not figured out how to get out of that. And I know we were talking about this when we met a couple of weeks ago, and both lamenting that neither of us were further out of it than we are. Talk a little bit about the idea of one-to-one leverage, and then how the weeds kind of look at leverage.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the first thing is we're taught to operate at one-to-one leverage. I mean, when we played, let's say, musical chairs, and the first time you did it, and then the music stopped, you discovered, okay, then I need to be proactive. I need to be watching each chair as I go by, and when that music stops, I'm grabbing the one that I'm watching. But you become proactive, and that's our introduction probably to competition and being self-sufficient. And then we're told, study hard, get good grades, you'll get a great job, but you can't scale that. You can't have 1,000 jobs, right? So if we think about entrepreneurs, we're probably some of the most self-sufficient people there are on the planet. I mean, we're the ones that say, you know what, there's a need for this, or I've got a vision for a product or a service or a platform, and I know I know it makes sense, and we make them happen. So we're probably most challenged with being stuck in one-to-one leverage. And it's really just, are you, first of all, are you part of the deliverable stream of your business? If you are, you're holding it back. You're a bottleneck to your business. And I as I was writing the book, I have a great little business. I have an agency, and we help sales teams break through, but we create campaigns to do that. And I think I could probably better describe myself as the creative director of the company, as opposed to the CEO or the chief weed officer, perhaps. I don't know, maybe not anymore. But what I'm always doing is, first of all, I'm always involved in the creative. So when a new assignment comes in, I'm creating it. That's not good. Well, I mean, it's good and it's not. I mean, it's not good if I'm going to try to scale something. And then a lot of our campaigns, well, I want to create something that people haven't seen before or is astonishing in some way. And so a lot of times what I'm really doing is prototyping something, or I'm using something from one industry or some other area in a different way. When we send big boards around, I guess we're on camera, so I can show you a big board, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So here's a big board. So this is the contact device I use myself, and that I use to help sales teams break through. And so there's a cartoon, there's a caption. The caption is personalized. This one shows two women having coffee, and one of them is saying to the other, well, actually, I sent one of these to Mark Cuban, so I'll put his name in it. So when I sent his, she was saying, Mark Cuban says you can tell a lot about a person just by looking at their Mavs tickets. I tend to agree. And of course, Mark loved it. And so that's framed and it's up on his wall. And so on the back is branding and messaging from the sender to the recipient, explaining who they are, why they want to meet, and next steps. And so that's what I use to break through. And that's, of course, one of my unfair advantages showing up again. I'm one of those I'm a cartoonist. I get to send this thing out. If I'm sending it and I sign it, it's an unfair advantage because people realize, well, wow, this is the cartoonist who just sent this to me. I mean, this didn't just show up as a campaign. Yeah. So I don't know. Does any of that make sense? Because I got a little, I got a little bit lost on the question.
No,
too.
I think that's actually a good illustration. I think a lot of us, particularly in professional service businesses, we start the business because we know how to do the thing that we're doing for clients.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes very hard to try and translate the secret sauce. I mean, like in your case, the secret sauce is you've got to make the cartoon, or you've got to customize what it says, and you've got a particular talent for that. Yeah. So how do you bottle that now and get other people to do it so that you're no longer the bottleneck?
Well, so I'm sorry, I lost the beat a little bit, because really what I was trying to say was I'm involved in the deliverable process completely, and that's not good, and I can't scale that. So one of the steps that I need to take is to say, well, okay, right, then how do I take this? And by the way, I don't create new cartoons every time I send one. So I have an image bank of about, 15 or 1,600 cartoons that have personalization in them. And so we can draw upon, no pun intended, but we can draw upon that bank to produce these campaigns. But really, if I want to grow it, what I know what I should do is I should talk to some of the big platforms, let's say Sendoso or ReachDesk, some Postal.io and so on, and productize what I'm doing. So instead of me coming up with a new thing every time, it's a product. Here's the one that you use if you want to get someone to call you back. Here's the one that you want to use if you want to ask for a meeting. And you just choose from a menu, and they go out in great bulk. And I'm not involved in the middle. I don't have to touch it at all. And that's the way you scale. You have to rethink it. You have to rethink it so that you take yourself out of the equation, and at least put more people in so that they're running. I mean, here's kind of the acid test. If you go on vacation or if you get sick and that means your business stops, you're working at one-to-one leverage, and you can see just how perilous it is.
So if that's sort of the danger zone, how do the weeds do it differently?
Well, for example, if you noticed a dandelion in your lawn and you thought that might be the only one, look up and you'll see that they never do anything without scale. They never do anything that's at one-to-one leverage, for sure. But if there was only one dandelion showing up in your lawn, it would be nothing to get rid of it. We wouldn't even think of it as a pest. It just, I don't know what that was. Take it out. But they don't work that way. They work together and they collaborate. And I think that's probably the key word, is that they collaborate. And so after writing the book, I thought, hey, I need to grow. I want to grow my business differently now. I want to run this differently. And so one of the first things that I realized that I've got plenty of unfair advantages, but of course you can always make more. That my relationship with NASDAQ is an unfair advantage. It's a cultivated one, but then the next thing you need to do is you need to broaden it. And so I'm now very, very actively reaching out to, for example, all of the thought leaders in sales that I know because I've interviewed them for my books and so on, to say, why don't we partner up on this on big boards? Why don't we, I can help your sales, I should say your clients' sales teams break through, and we can make money together. So I'm putting that out there, and that's starting to happen. And so it's those alliances that I think just make so much sense. Another one, we're starting to put together small masterminds, mastermind growth summits, and we're going to be partnering with the thought leaders that I know to do a joint venture on those things. So we split revenue, but we were able then to work together and bring, a handful of people paying a pretty nice sum per seat, and we get to help them just put their business growth on a rocket ship, and everybody wins that way. And it happens because, it wouldn't have happened or it would have happened much more slowly without these collaborations.
Absolutely. And there are so many leverage points in it. And, as you were describing all that, I'm sitting here thinking about the math of the dandelion. One plant, and you said 15,000 seeds over its lifetime. That's exponential growth.
That's true. That's true.
It's the definition of exponential.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. But then you multiply that again, because they're not acting alone. They never do anything alone. And when you look up and you see perhaps hundreds of dandelions in your lawn, they're all pumping out 15,000 seeds. So that's huge, huge geometric progression. And that's why we can't get rid of them.
Well, so interesting. I had an experience like that about 8 years ago. I wrote my first book. And I think anytime anyone writes a book, it's an unfair advantage. In most markets, that will set you apart. And I had 15 people help me share the book during the launch. I didn't know what I was doing. Self-published, made all the mistakes you could make. But those 15 people got that book out to over 5,000 potential clients in a week.
That is truly weed-like spread, isn't it?
Right. So then the question is, how do you keep doing it? Once you've discovered that, now how do you replicate? And so to me, the thing that I got from the book was just a different lens through which to think about the business, through which to think about what am I going to do this month, this quarter, this year to create more weed-like growth.
You're right. It's an unfair advantage. I think another one that's just really critical is just our backstories, because if you've got a great story to tell, because you were saying, By the way, I'd love to know how you multiplied 15 into 5,000. That's remarkable. For book sales, that's remarkable. And then how do you then get those 5,000 to do the same thing? I don't know, because I don't know what you did, but I would think that story has a lot to do with it, because that's the thing that causes people to just say, I mean, this is just, I heard a story today and I got to share this with you. It's an amazing story. And that's how you get a lot of people to do it at scale. Well, I guess that's kind of redundant, but yeah, to create scale for you that way. What did you do? How did you get 15,000 to turn into 5,000?
Well, some of it was luck. And so I had built relationships with people all over the world through a podcast back in 2012. So 2 years before the book. Mm-hmm. And I'd interviewed 50 people over the course of a year. 15 of them agreed to help with the launch. I'd maintained a good enough relationship that they were willing to help. And a few of them had large audiences, and a lot of them didn't. But it was those few that really pushed that. And mm-hmm. So, if you think back about how do you replicate, that's one of the reasons I have a podcast, because I found that it's the easiest way to meet with people, build a relationship with people who are also looking to build relationships and to build an audience. So I'm already talking to the right people. So that increases my odds of sort of hitting the winner again. And then having something easy to share. That was the other thing I found that for me is, as I was reading the chapter on seed strategy, I said, well, my book is my seed. I've got 5 books now. You've got books. They work like seeds. The wind will take them. You don't know where they're going to go. They're easy to mm-hmm. spread. Mm-hmm. And you don't know when they're going to germinate, but many of them do. And so anyway, that's sort of the way that I thought about it as I was reading your book, and that's how I've applied some of those strategies.
Yeah, well, I mean, your podcast is also a seed strategy, and mm-hmm. and the fact that I'm on with you is a seed pod strategy. So mm-hmm. We're having a great conversation, and hopefully there's a lot of value exchanged. But I'm reaching your audience that way, and so
yes,
that is what we do. I mean, that's what that's what weeds do.
Yeah, so I can't recommend the book enough. I think anybody listening to this needs to get a copy of the book. If you're watching on YouTube, there it is, How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed. I really do think that it is going to be that business classic that we're all talking about 10 or 20 years from now, and it's on the reading list. There's new thinking here, and that's what I like about it. And you don't often see that in business books. So congratulations.
Thank you so much.
And it's the key, this is really important, because a lot of times you'll get a book like this out and it'll be a regurgitation of things that have come before, but a complication of them. Mm-hmm. You've simplified. And I think that's why it makes it so helpful. So where's the best place for people to go to find the book and then find out more about you, connect with the work that you're doing?
Well, I mean, so How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed, find it anywhere books are sold, really, except the airport, I guess. I don't think it's there, but so Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, et cetera, they're anywhere you buy books, you'll find it. But you can, so in terms of reaching me or connecting with me, I would invite you to visit my author site. So that's StuHeinecke.com. I'll spell it StuHeinecke.com. And you can sign up for my list, and you can also, by doing that, you get the first 2 chapters of How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed for free. So that's kind of a nice thing. Or connect with me on LinkedIn, mention that you heard me on Steve's podcast, and I would love to connect with you that way as well.
That's fantastic. And we'll link the website up in the show notes. So if you're listening to this on your mobile device, look in the show notes with the episode, or you can go to our website and look for this episode and find the link there so that you don't have to write it down if you're driving. We want you to be safe. Stu Heinecke, this has been awesome. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us and for investing some time with me today. It's been a pleasure to get to know you and talk about these things. I look forward to the next conversation.
Thank you so much. And thanks for having me on the show.